you've been around here long enough, you've heard me say many times that I was raised in church. I was raised in church. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, vacation Bible school, camp meeting, conferences, church camps, seminars, youth events, service projects, and Sunday school. Anybody who survives this much church comes out in one of two ways. Either they never darken the door of the church again, or they go into the ministry. I guess I'm in the second category. Even so, my relationship with the church is a mixed bag, and I think if you listen to me, you know that as well. There are days when I am filled with hope about what we can do together, and there are other days when I wonder what we are doing together. I tried to leave the church once, I really did. I tried to break up with her. I had escaped from this miserable job at a dysfunctional parish in a neighboring state. I moved into the city and I decided that I would be free of this troublesome institution. It lasted all of 3 months. When I finally did go back to church, as wounded and as angry as I was, I sat in the back of that great sanctuary with just a few people in it, and I wept as the people sang the hymns. I wouldn't sing them, but I cried. I was home. But some people do leave the church for good. Not all the stories are such happy endings. Statistics for our mainline denominations are not very encouraging in that regard. Without some significant intervening variables, we will continue to decline as the culture becomes less and less religious, as the United States moves more firmly into its post-Christian era, and churches are seen by the masses as irrelevant to a good life. This thought used to scare me to death. After all, I make my living in the church. But more recently, as I have read about this, I'm not the only one who's been thinking about it, and I have discussed it with friends in the ministry, and I have pondered what it might mean, I have decided that perhaps what is really passing away is the way we do church, and not the church itself. Maybe the super institutions of denominational structures, maybe that's what's passing away. Because institutions, especially big ones, by definition, are self-preserving, more often turned inward than turned outward. That's just the way it is. And it makes me wonder if perhaps the real hope of the church lies in individual congregations that dedicate themselves to the way of Jesus, come what may, and are not really that concerned about their survival. They're far more focused on their mission in the world. Well, this past Monday, when I first read the gospel lesson, I really wondered what I could say to you about it, because it seems so concerned with institution. It is often quoted by the institution as justification for its existence. People point to this passage and say, here we have scriptural evidence for ecclesiastical authority and structured leadership and creedal conformity. So they say. Well, Jesus and his disciples had traveled to the farthest northern reaches of Galilee, to a place called Caesarea Philippi. It's a very, very lovely place that I once visited. Once they arrived, Jesus turned to his friends and asked them what the word on the street was about him. And so the disciples presented the Lord with this straw poll results. Well, Jesus, some people say you're John the Baptist or Elijah, but others think you might be Jeremiah or one of the prophets. stopped them and said, well, that's all very interesting, but what about all of you? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus declared then at that moment that this knowledge had been revealed to Peter by God, and then Jesus rewarded his star pupil with this eternal blessing. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give to you the keys of the kingdom, and whatever it is you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In these few short verses, Matthew lays out his vision of how the church started. Built upon the foundation of a confession about who Jesus is. Peter called a rock the one who would lead the church after the crucifixion, and a leader who had been given this tremendous authority to bind and loose things on earth and in heaven. Well, this passage is very popular with those Christians, those sisters and brothers of ours with a strong ecclesiology, a doctrine of the church. Catholics in particular like it. But it makes folks like us a little nervous, I think. Congregationalists, by their very nature, are not people easily swayed by the right answer, especially in matters of faith and conscience. We don't have a pope, we don't have any bishops, and we don't want any of them. And we certainly do not believe that power should be concentrated in the hands of a few, especially the hands of preachers. We don't want that. So what shall we do with this story? How shall we read it? How shall we live it? How shall we honor it? Well, to do that, to honor it, to live it, to understand it, we have to excavate the text a little bit, to dig around. When you dig around, you find all these really interesting things just under the surface of the soil. First of all, the setting of this story is highly significant. Caesarea Philippi is beautiful, as I said, but it also has a very nasty past. It was the global cultic center of Pan worship. Remember Pan, the goat god, half man, half goat? Rumor had it, according to the locals, that Pan, the goat god, had been born in a nearby creepy cave known to the locals as the Gates of Hell. Scholars tell us that Pan worship was highly orgiastic in nature. And they say these orgies sometimes featured goats. In addition, Caesarea Philippi had also been the site for the worship of the god Baal. Remember those folks? In their liturgy, they sometimes included human sacrifice. Later on, it was the place where the Romans planned the siege of Jerusalem, the sacking of the city. First-century Jewish historian Josephus reports that it was in Caesarea Philippi that some of the Jewish captives were brought back and then thrown to the wild animals to be eaten alive. It's a beautiful place, but it's bathed in blood. And it was here. It was in Caesarea Philippi, a place bathed in blood, not in Jerusalem, not in the temple, not in a synagogue, no place holy, that Jesus brought his closest friends to inaugurate the church. Now, what do you think that might mean? Second, even though Peter said that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of the living God, it is important for us to remember that there were some other answers that day. People had all sorts of notions about who Jesus was. They still do. There was no clear consensus in Jesus' day. There is no clear consensus now. But consensus is not really the point. It's far more personal than that. Jesus wanted to know who his friends thought he was. Peter, who do you say that I am? It was a personal question. It always is. We may recite creeds and quote Scripture, but at the end of the day, this is a question about our relationship with Jesus Christ. So I ask you, congregation, who is Jesus to you? And however you answer that question, how does that affect the way that you live in this blood-bathed world of ours? And finally, there's all this talk about the gates of hell. Most people read or hear this passage as a promise that God will protect the church and that the church will endure. That even hell itself cannot destroy the church. And for most of my life, that is what I assumed this passage meant. But that is not what the passage says. Consider this. Gates are not offensive. They don't do anything except just stand there, right? Gates are defensive. Gates are meant to keep people out. Gates keep Palestinians out of Israel. And gates keep poor people out of our gated communities. And gates keep immigrants out of our country. So Jesus' use of the phrase, the gates of hell, must mean then that God is sending us, the church, to tear down the gates of hell. The gates of hell shall not prevail against our efforts. That's what Jesus said. God is sending the church to beat on the walls and bend the bars and break the windows so that all the people trapped in hell can come outside in the sunshine for a bit and breathe. Episcopal priest and blogger Rick Morley puts it like this. The forces of wickedness and evil should tremble when we approach. When they try and starve our brothers and sisters in Haiti and Kenya, we boldly come with food. When they try to enslave our young sisters in South Asia and Eastern Europe, we come and set them free and demand respect. When they try and put machine guns and machetes in the hands of our young African brothers, we come with peace and reconciliation. When they come with malaria, we come with nets. When they come with addiction and depression, we bring hope and comfort. When evil comes with the dark, we bring the light. When it comes with despair, we bring hope. When people cower behind the gates of death, we tear down the gates with the resurrection of our Lord. There are days when I still despair over the timidness of so much of organized religion. And maybe on a slow summer Sunday with a few people in church who wonder what it is that we can do. My question is, how in hell can we be so complacent when so many people are in hell? there are other days when I am so proud of what we do together. There are times when I listen to your stories and I am awed by how bravely some of you march into the gates of hell every day in your jobs and your callings, with your neighbors and your friends. And on those days, I understand why I am still drawn to the community of the faithful, those people who will not give up on the promises of God. And that promise, friends, believe it or not, is the promise of a better world, a more gracious community, a more faithful nation. And I do so long for a better world, don't you? When you let your cynicism go for just a second, don't you long for a better world? I long for peace and justice and plenty to be the birthright of every one of God's children, don't you? And to those of us who so do long, for those of us with enough courage to hope in the promises, Christ himself has already made a promise that this kind of community, a church in the world and for the world and of the world, a church without walls of any kind, a church unafraid to march into hell, will not fail until the gates of hell crumble at our feet and love wins. God wins. Hope wins. Thanks be to God.